Hello, welcome to Rust Belt Science. I'm your host, Maggie Fink.
And I'm Shahir Rizk.
Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Lee Haines, who is a research scientist here at the University of Notre Dame. I'm very excited to talk to her today about not only her research, but her interest in science and art and creativity in research. So welcome, Lee.
Oh, thank you. It's amazing to be here.
Good. So we start off by asking all of our guests a question that we did not provide you ahead of time, so hopefully it won't throw you off. But we want to know if you are listening to, watching, reading anything interesting right now. Doesn't have to be academic at all. In fact, preferably, but anything interesting you're consuming right now.
Okay. What I am consuming right now is Blind Boy podcast. So he's a podcaster who is autistic. He does deep dives onto fascinating topics, and he has a fabulous accent from Limerick, Ireland. So I love immersing myself in him, especially when I have a task I really don't want to do.
Yeah. Seems to be a lot of scientists listen to podcasts when they're doing work they don't really want to be doing. I know I listen to podcasts all the time. So, okay, I'll have to add it to my list.
Yeah, sounds like a cool podcast.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. That was the first question, and you passed with flying colors.
Excellent.
So the first question I have for you about your research is pretty basic because I honestly did not know the answer to this initially. You are a vector biologist.
I am.
That is in your title. And I did not know what that was. I had a vague idea. I had some guesses, but the actual definition was a bit surprising to me. So I want you to explain what a vector biologist is, but I also have I asked some friends and family, including my kids, what they thought a vector biologist was. Some of these are maybe funny and interesting guesses. Somebody thought it was a person who studies the location of different biology. Okay.
Vector.
Person,
yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Vector can mean many things. So,
Right.
a person who studies airflow.
I like it.
Yeah. This is my personal favorite, which you'll understand why in a minute. A person who studies flower nectar, which I realized was they thought I said nectar and not vector. And that was my 11-year-old son. And then he's like, oh, then I have no idea. And then finally, a person who studies electricity. So a wide range of guesses.
I love all of these. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say someone who studies the biology of cereal. Because a lot of people know the vector cereal. I'm like, no, not vector cereal.
Yeah.
They'd be nice.
Yeah.
But you would be great for snacking on. But vector, in the case of my research, is usually an insect or an arthropod that transmits a disease. So I'm looking at bugs that are dangerous in a way. And not only what diseases they transmit or spread to humans and animals, but how we can interfere with that process. Do the bugs or like mosquitoes get sick? Do we need to annihilate them all because they're horrible? Or do we need to keep them? And how do we just keep ourselves and our animals safe, crops? Yeah, so it can expand into many different realms. But for me, I'm a bug person.
Okay. I think that is super cool. When I heard you studied bugs, bugs, insects, I don't know what, that there's a technical term, but then also bugs. I it's kind of the easy one. I was like, that's so cool. And especially, there is this element of disease in there as well. So how much of the disease part do you work on, or is it really just understanding the insects themselves and how their life cycles, their environment, and how that then leads to disease? Or what part of that is your research more?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. I'm really big on communicating on behalf of the insect. So I love to study how they think, how they behave, how they feel, and how that impacts how healthy they are. And then what I can do to perturb how healthy they are and what kind of output that would have as a human. So yeah, I study the parasites themselves. I grow the parasites. I grow the tsetse flies or the mosquitoes. and see how they get along and pull into that the microbiome and how that influences this wonderful interrelationship that they all have. So it's different every day.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shahir.
Were you always, I'm just curious, were you always interested in insects? Like as a child?
I hated them.
Yes, I was hoping that was the answer.
Oh my goodness, I hated them. I'm one of these people that just didn't like them. Yeah. But where I grew up, you couldn't avoid them.
Yeah.
And so you had a choice. You either feared them and ran away and had them dictate how you felt about life and yourself.
Yes.
Or you focused on them and learned more about them and became fascinated by them. So I was kind of a reluctant person to become fascinated by them because where I grew up, there's lots of blood-sucking, thirsty creatures like mosquitoes and black flies and midges and horseflies and deer flies. And they all want your blood or they want your animal's blood.
Yeah.
So I hated them and wanted to find ways to kill them.
Yes.
And without appreciating that maybe they had a purpose. But at least I got over my fear of them. That was the first step. And now I am absolutely enthralled about many different insects, not just the ones that spread diseases.
Excellent.
You mentioned growing up and where you grew up was unavoidable with these insects. Can you talk a little bit more about how you grew up, where you grew up, and because it seems like a unique experience to have that many insects around you all the time.
Oh, yes, unique. That's the word I'd use.
I'm very curious.
I originally grew up in northern Canada, so it's not really northern, but it's considered northern. It's the central part of British Columbia, and there was lots of winter months, so I remember a reprieve from insects because of the cold weather, which was heavenly. Now that's not the case, but when I was growing up, it was great. And I grew up in a kind of a trapper's cabin. My parents were homesteaders. And so it was like a quintessential log cabin Canadian experience.
Wow.
And we had animals and we had a hobby farm. So the health of the animals was dependent on how you cared for them. And you were at the mercy of the weather and the insects and diseases. So it was impossible to not become a part of that ecology. And you realize that your actions have massive consequences. And so, I don't know, it was this awareness that it wasn't just us. And we were part of the problem and the solution. And the insects were sometimes our allies and in many cases not.
So you were totally immersed in the environment with its insects, with its animals, with its plants and the weather and everything.
Yeah.
And then, so how are insects on your side sometimes?
They tell you things, they let you know when there's going to be an adverse weather event or if there's going to be a bumper crop of I don't know, the fruit or,
So
mainly they're negative, but they also make sure that your crops produce better. And so if you realize that there's an insect extinction, you're in trouble and you need to try and compensate somehow for that. So if you listen to them and appreciate something like butterflies are very nice, you end up incorporating them into your ethos of being in a way.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I can imagine growing up in an environment like that. It kind of becomes second nature to pay attention to the things that are around you, that you're not even realizing that you're taking in information from these insects until you kind of take a step back and say, oh, this is what it's telling me. You kind of just use that as, like, we can smell rain coming and things. We don't even think about it. But in an environment where insects are such a huge part of your lifestyle and raising animals and all of that, I can imagine you don't even have to think about it at some point.
No, and if you raise chickens or ducks or other type of poultry, they love the insects and they're in there with you gardening and weeding and you end up having healthier eggs because of the source that you have for your animals. So you want them to be lots of diversity and insects around.
Yeah, we used to have our house sprayed for bugs because we were having a lot of them in the house and they were really harmless. But eventually I was like, no, let's let everything just live here with us. And my husband didn't love the idea at first, but I was like, we're not, you know, they live here too, and they're important for the garden and the ducks that I raise and everything. So I've grown to appreciate the role insects play even in a more suburban area that I live in. So I always dream of living in a more rural part and just getting to enjoy the insects because they're fun. They're really cool.
You're fun, and you've also got to just give up because they will win.
They will win.
So you just have to embrace them and not wage a war with them, and your life will be much more peaceful.
Yeah. I will sometimes kill a spider in my house if it gets too close. The idea of a spider crawling on me at night does still creep me out, but I try for the most part to just let it be. Sometimes my cats will get them, but I've embraced it. It's there's no use fighting it.
No.
And they're not going to really harm you.
No, they won't.
And we don't really, here in South Bend, in this part of the country, we don't really have like the same kind of insects that you're describing, these black flies and horse flies and things that will suck your blood. We do have mosquitoes, flies,
ticks,
and ticks.
Ticks are a big one here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing that is so massive or something like horse flies, for example. We don't usually have those here.
No, and they're a force to be reckoned with. I mean, they fly so fast. They're impossible to kill by swatting them. I mean, you really have to practice your kung fu. They're horrible. They're horrible pests. They drive animals mad.
Yeah.
You'd be thankful you don't have the horseflies here.
I'm very thankful we don't have horseflies here.
Yeah, I am. I mean, mosquitoes are bad enough here sometimes. And mosquitoes are... when I thought of a vector biologist, that was kind of my first thought was mosquitoes. You study mosquitoes and study malaria. Like, that's really my only frame of reference for this type of research. But you don't study mosquitoes, right? Or at least not solely?
I do, but not solely.
Yeah. So, I was really curious to find out that there are more vector-borne diseases and other insects that are a part of that. And even though I know about ticks and Lyme disease, I didn't really connect the dots that would be considered something that a vector biologist could study. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the bugs you study, some of the diseases, especially ones that maybe do affect people here in this area in the United States a little bit more than some of these more tropical related diseases?
So the landscape is changing thanks to climate change and human migration patterns, and ticks and insects don't really listen to border patrols. And they hitchhike on birds and animals, and so the climate is changing, and so is the environment and the geography. So you might be safe right now from some of the diseases that are spread by insects, but my guess is that in the future that will change. So right now, West Nile virus is something here, and that's spread by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are the predominant spreaders of diseases that are of a concern to humans and animals. And there are a lot of mosquitoes. So there's more than 3,500 species of mosquitoes. Wow. Now, there's only a small handful that do spread diseases, but when they do, Also here, like we said already, are the ticks. And in some cases, a lot of people experience the cicada emergence this year. So they have a mite that feeds on the eggs of the cicadas. And if they bite you or you rub they're quite furry, into your skin, you have quite an adverse reaction. It's a high allergy. It's an oak mite. Yes. And so that exploded because of the cicadas, and they feed on the cicada eggs. So it's not really a vector-borne disease, but it's certainly a vector-borne condition that we have to deal with. Another one is the Lone Star tick is making its way into Indiana. And with that comes an interesting allergy called the alpha-gal syndrome, where you become allergic to red meat and red meat products.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So it's a Lone Star tick. It's got a big white spot on its back, and it has been seen in Indiana.
Oh, no.
So it's coming, and people here are already reporting a really violent reaction to meat about 8 hours after you eat it, and it's a troubling allergy to have to live with.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a different different way of thinking about insects and diseases, in fact, because is a disease an allergy? I mean, it might feel
Sure.
like it.
Sure.
Yeah. And then there's also kissing bugs that are coming up from the south. And there are sometimes hitchhiking on people and animals that are coming with migration, whether you're like importing cattle to your herd. There's other diseases called Theileria that are also spread by a tick that can kill a cow in 3 weeks. It's a really nasty infection.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's a lot out there, but there's also a lot of hope because we have ways to prevent infections and we're smart about things when we go hiking. Yeah, so even though it's on the rise, we are in a fortunate place in the world where we have screens on our windows, we have access to bug spray, we don't have baking hot weather all the time.
Yeah.
So it's a natural way to help us deal with these insect-associated ailments.
And so that's, with obviously with climate change and the change in the environment and in geography and in the weather, we typically, most of us think of these vector-borne diseases as tropical diseases. And, maybe that's a misconception, or maybe that's just something that was true to some extent, but now is changing. What are your thoughts on that? What is the expert opinion on that?
Ooh, the expert opinion.
That's
I'll
you,
give
by
you
the way.
my opinion. My opinion is things are normally tropical based because there aren't harsh winters.
Right.
So you get populations expanding over time. And I mean, the most strenuous thing for, at least for a blood feeder, would be having a host to feed on, like where. So if you are a tsetse fly, which is a bug that I specialize in, that is based in many African countries, it has to suck blood to survive. It doesn't drink nectar. So it has to follow around herds or people.
Yeah.
So if you have a drought, that negatively will impact the population of that creature, the insect. So it's not like a winter, but it is certainly going to drop the numbers. So I would say the climate usually dictates how many different species of insects you have and how many diseases that could be circulating. So yes, tropical gives the illusion that there's more water for breeding. There's nice and milder climates. We travel to tropical destinations in the winter.
Right.
But saying that, because things are warming up here and winters are becoming milder, we will have more. And it could be that certain areas in the tropics are going to become too hot to have the populations of insects survive. They can't adapt so quickly. And regions in the north, like northern Canada or even northern United States, where they were typically absolutely a no-fly zone for these creatures, they're now migrating.
Wow.
So, yeah, this is an interesting time to ask me that question.
Definitely interesting time.
Good job. Good job.
Well, thanks.
Yes.
I want to back up because it just occurred to me that this idea that these insects suck blood, you know that mosquitoes will suck your blood, but they're doing that as a food source?
Mm-hmm. But only when they want to lay eggs.
Only when they want to lay eggs.
For mosquitoes, right?
For mosquitoes,
that's...
only the females will feed on you.
Can you explain, why that is and how would they know? I guess you don't think of bugs as like knowing things. It's just, I did not even occur to ask this kind of question, that there's a reason that they're doing it. It might not be just for food. There's specific time. Can you talk about that? This is so cool.
So in some insect species, they will not feed on blood unless they've been mated. So once they're mated, their body goes into this program where I've got to produce eggs, and they need a lot more protein than you get from nectar, sugar sources. So they have to go for the high protein blood meal, which makes you a target. Particularly if you're smelly. The smellier you are, the more you smell like Limburger cheese, the more mosquitoes you're going to attract. So the female finds you very attractive, and she will take that blood meal and immediately, at least if it's a mosquito, within 2 to 3 days, lay her eggs, and then she deposits them close to water. And then that's it. She's like, you're on your own. You've got to filter feed your way to adulthood. Whereas with a tsetse fly, They only feed on blood. Both the males and females can spread diseases because they feed on blood. But the female is unique because she doesn't lay eggs. So she ovulates, the egg travels into her uterus, and then 9 days later, she gives birth to a baby backwards. The baby crawls out, and that baby is the size of her. So it's like giving birth to a teenager.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, one baby, but all of her nutrients, she feeds them on this like really thick milk that is filled with protein and fat that comes from the blood.
Sure.
So she's able to do that, provision the baby with everything that thing is going to need for the next month while it's hibernating underground before it can mature into a full fly. So these are two very different strategies for building a population. And they all require blood because they want to have offspring.
And do mosquitoes or any of these other insects that drink blood, do they discriminate against humans and animals, or do they generally kind of whoever has blood will take?
I think it depends on how desperate they are.
Okay.
Yeah, and what they're attracted to. So with tsetse flies, when they first emerge, some species can't stand the smell of humans. They run away, they fly away, they target monitor lizards, and you will be a repellent. But if they're really hungry and you're the only warm-blooded host around with blood, and it means them dying or surviving, they will feed on you. Mosquitoes, some really like birds, like the ones for Eastern equine encephalitis, love feeding on birds. Right. And when they feed on a human, it's kind of a mistake, but you get very sick. So it is all about the right place, the right time. How hungry are you? Yeah. You know, when do you want to go to that buffet? A little bit like us, you know.
Yeah,
it's like, I feel like pizza today. Yeah, no, I actually feel like a nice vegetarian something. I'm going to feed on nectar. But it's different relationships for every single insect, and then different for the species within the grouping, you know, and whether you're a male or female.
Right. So then the tsetse fly will give birth essentially to this almost massive baby.
Yeah.
Is she able to go and mate again?
She doesn't need to. See, she's got this. It's either a blessing or a curse. You guys can decide.
Oh boy.
So when she is mated, the male delivers a nice little package of sperm for her that she just tucks away and keeps in these specialized organs so that she stays fertile all her life.
Wow.
So she never has to mate again.
So she don't need no man.
She doesn't. She just needs that first encounter.
That's it.
But you could curse somebody horribly by wishing that they would be reincarnated as a tsetse fly, a female tsetse fly, because she is eternally pregnant.
Yes.
She is giving birth every 9 days.
Wow.
And by the time she gives birth, she is so big that she can't even hold a blood meal. So she's starving. She wants to get that baby out of there. Yeah. So the minute her water breaks and that thing backs out, the weight difference is she almost floats away looking for food. Yeah. So they get quite desperate after they've given birth to feed, and they become extremely persistent. So if there's not their favorite food source around, they don't care. They just like, get me something to eat now.
They'll eat anything.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating creature to study because it's so unusual.
And
Are there any other insects that have this kind of birth cycle?
There are some. There's like I think it's a sheepked that they live all their life and all the different life cycle stages on the animal, and they get very large, and the female gives birth to a live young. But usually it's only one young at a time, or usually it's one at a time. So it's a very slow reproductive strategy, and they're very specialized for certain hosts or areas. So they are also easy to disrupt if you decide to have some sort of way to control them, whether you're spraying insecticide or putting up sticky traps. Or they're easier to control than, say, a mosquito that throws eggs out everywhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. That is wild. I didn't want to read too much about your research and stuff before we did this interview because I wanted to kind of learn in real time and react. And so this is, I feel
the shock and awe.
It's like, what? That sounds awful and incredible at the same time.
It's quite fascinating. And so the tsetse flies, what disease are they mostly transmitting if they are vectors for this disease? Tell us a little bit more about the diseases that they're actually transmitting.
So they spread a disease called African trypanosomiasis. It's a mouthful. So it's also known as African sleeping sickness, which maybe you've heard of.
Yes.
In animals, they call it nagana, but it's a similar thing where the tsetse fly becomes infected with the parasite by feeding off of something that already is infected. Then the fly gets sick because it's got this parasite living inside of it. The parasite breaks out of its gut and migrates usually to its mouth or salivary glands. And then when the fly goes to feed again, it infects the next host. And so the symptoms of becoming sick is in the name, African sleeping sickness. So you become lethargic, you have pains, you end up sleeping a lot. The flies love it because they bite you during the day. So the more that you sleep, the more access that parasite is going to be transmitted from that sleeping host. And if it goes untreated, you slip into a coma and die because they get into your cerebral spinal fluid. So, and you could go a little bit, I don't want to say loco, because your brain is inflamed and you have fevers like malaria. It is not a nice disease. And animals also die. Horses rapidly die of it. The flies attack you because they can fly very quickly. So you can get a swarm chasing you, kind of like horseflies.
Yes.
And they're everywhere in the savannas and in the forest regions and in the riverine region. So there's many different species and they have their preferred hosts and environments. So if you go on safari, you will encounter a tsetse fly.
Tsetse fly.
I promise you. And it will hurt depending on where it bites you. So if it goes for your ankles, run away. It hurts. If it bites you under your chin, you don't feel it.
Really?
Yeah. If it bites you on your forearm, you don't feel it. It's like where you have all the nerves, fingertips, the ankles. But anyway, yes, that's to give you a summary of you don't want to get African sleeping sickness
Absolutely
or
not.
nagana.
No, not interested.
There are new cures for it, but getting access to them is tricky. There's also old medications that are a little bit more toxic that you don't necessarily want to take because the side effects can be brutal. But it is decreasing in the world, thankfully, with insect control and treatment of patients. So the numbers are dropping. But in the animal population, it's still huge. It's a massive economic burden on countries that want to have cattle, particularly that coexist with tsetse flies in areas, or even the wildlife parks, where you have lots of tsetse flies spreading this disease. You can wipe out some of your big game.
Yeah, and this brings me to a question about, we want insects are good, right? We need insects around for a lot of different reasons. So wiping out an entire species of an insect
Don't do it.
that causes a disease, that's not a viable option.
It's not a smart one either.
Can you explain why that is? I mean, maybe, in my mind, it's like, yeah, just get rid of it all and then we won't have the disease. But that has just this, ripple effect. Can you talk about that?
I can, and it's because we don't know. We're just simply we have too many knowledge gaps to know exactly what that effect will have down the road. I'm going to use an example of a dung beetle because I like dung beetles. So if you are a farmer and you're a good farmer and you want to take care of your animals and you're looking after cattle, you want to deworm them to make sure that they don't have a high worm burden, for instance. And most people use a very easily available drug. And I'm going to say this drug, and you're like, I know that drug, ivermectin. Right? Ivermectin. Lots of people talk about ivermectin. I work with ivermectin. And what happens is you treat your animals and they poop. You can't stop them from pooping, but their poop is toxic because they've taken on ivermectin.
Right.
And it remains toxic for quite a while, and that's dropping into the soil. So you have your dung beetles coming along to eat the poo and create, an environment for their offspring. And it kills all of them, the bacteria and the microflora that live in the soil. So the dung beetles die and their offspring die. So you end up clearing your field indirectly because you dewormed and taken care of your cows. So it ends up that you don't have any type of insect that can take the poo from the surface and bring it down into the soil. So what happens is you have all your poo staying on the surface.
Right.
You end up killing off all your grass. you have no grassland left for your animals to graze. You're going to have to move them. You're going to have to till that soil. You're probably going to have to replant because you don't have seeds being pulled down. You will have fecal material washing into your waterways.
Right.
You will have a loss of carbon sequestration. It's a disaster.
It is a
Yeah.
disaster.
Just because you decided to look after your animals with a drug that you didn't realize the impact you were having on the local flora and fauna. So I'm all about balance, moderation, understanding the networks that you are dealing with, that it's not just ever one question. It's, okay, I would like to do that. I wonder if that has an effect, but what am I missing?
Yeah, I think it's this really human-centric view we have humans. It's kind of what we do. We only think about ourselves, and we don't really understand the impact of some of our decisions that, from livestock to plants. And Shahir and I have talked, even with bacteria, taking an antibiotic, right? You can really disrupt things in your own body that you didn't realize you needed just by taking that one medication. So I think, back to even talking about growing up in Northern Canada, this idea that everything's connected, and we just have lost a lot of that. And that's why I think your work is super cool, because yes, we can focus on the human diseases, but then not only those diseases in animals, but then how treatment or prevention affects. So it's a two-way street with these things.
Yeah.
So I think it's super cool. But I also, don't want to focus on disease the whole time, because I want to just learn more about cool insects, which I know you know a lot about. I mean, you already talked about the tsetse fly. But what other cool insects do you work on? Do you study? Or what's your favorite one that does some crazy stuff that we could just nerd out about with you?
Nerd out over insects. Oh
Yeah.
no, well, this is a local one.
Okay.
So I've just moved here to South Bend, and I'm enthralled by living in this country, and it is cool. But one of the things that when I moved here that I was a little bit terrified about were the cicadas, because they are such massive, chunky creatures, and I was like, and the noise, and I was like, what is that? And then I have cats, and they were even scared of them. So I was like, if a cat's scared, maybe that's because something else is going on.
Yeah.
So I kind of put my distance to cicadas. And then I was asked to give a talk on cicadas.
Oh, wow.
In May, which meant that I had to learn about them. And now again, I'm absolutely smitten by them. Absolutely fascinated. The more I learn, the more I know they have the most amazing things about them. And the ecosystem, the hornets that attack just them, and the weird fungus that rots out the abdomen by giving them like a high. So they don't even know that they can't mate anymore. They don't have an abdomen anymore. It's just a ball of fungus, but they feel great because the fungus is giving them drugs like magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
And you're just, what?
And all they're doing is just spreading.
Yeah, they're just like a salt and pepper shaker, they call them. They're spreading the spores everywhere,
How did I not know this?
I know.
This is so cool.
It's so cool. So all of these different stories. And then, I would just mention the dung beetle. Because when you have to talk about a subject, you have to deep dive into the subject. And you could just study it for a year and still not catch up on all the really fascinating research that's happening. But dung beetles can navigate by the Milky Way.
What?
Say what?
Okay, wait, hold on.
And you're like, what? How? First of all, how did a scientist figure out about that?
Yeah.
And they put baseball caps on the beetles to see if they could still roll in a straight line. These are the roller dung beetles. There's many different kinds. There's 3 different kinds of dung beetles, but the rollers, they're doing it upside down handstand.
Yeah.
So they're navigating by looking up. And if they're working during the day, they're using the sun or polarized light. But if they are navigating at night, they need to get away from that pile of dung as fast as possible, which means a straight line away from it. So they've got to use some sort of marking. So when they put the baseball caps on the dung beetles and put them into a planetarium, they noticed that they just aimlessly wandered around. And then when they took the baseball cap off so that they could navigate to the starlight, they went in a straight line.
That's a very clever scientist.
That's very clever
Very.
science, for sure.
And very
Yeah.
clever dung beetle.
Oh, very much so. So all of these kind of things, especially with insect vision or the way an insect can thermoregulate or how it can sense forest fires with the spruce beetles or, anything, they all have superpowers. And figuring out what they are that's the big fun of it all,
And so that's a very important point. They have superpowers
They do.
that are superhuman, meaning that we just don't have them.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to even start by asking the questions of what are they sensing and what are they feeling? And that's something that kind of caught my attention early on when you were saying that you want to know what these insects are feeling. Maybe not even just how they're communicating, but what input they're getting and how is that affecting them. So tell us a little bit more about that, and how do you think about it? How do you even begin to study senses that we don't have words to describe? We don't have organs to
You
even
need creativity.
for sure.
And you need to collaborate with people well outside of your field to inspire you to think on a new plane. And a bit of that can be reflected in my own scientific journey of why I'm here today with you. So I started out kind of doing marine biology and ecology and became a diver, scuba diver, and loved that world. But then I also fell in love with medical microbiology. So I was like, oh, these bacteria, they do really cool stuff.
We love bacteria on
I know
this
you
show.
do.
Yeah.
We love bacteria on this show. Yes.
But then that led me to biochemistry and parasitology because parasites are even more intelligent than bacteria. Sorry, but it's true.
That's true.
And
I'll take your word
so
for it.
I went deep into, say, for my master's degree, was looking at the trypanosome that spreads African sleeping sickness, like the parasite. So I'm very looking in the lab and how does this parasite behave and in my test tubes and all of this. And then it suddenly dawned on me, wait a minute, I'm missing the whole side of the story here. What's the parasite doing inside of the fly? What does the fly feel like when it's infected?
Yeah.
How does it spread the disease? If we don't know how it spreads the disease, then how can we possibly block it? Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Does it shorten its lifespan? Maybe it does. Maybe there's some sort of relationship with its gut bacteria.
Right.
And why don't we know these things? And it's because I was studying parasites from a lab perspective, from a human perspective, that made me realize I'm asking the wrong questions.
Right.
I want to look at it from the vector. So then I started studying medical entomology. So I feel like I'm a jack of all trades sometimes, this meandering, like a dung beetle with a baseball cap on. I'm meandering all over the place. But along that journey now, in hindsight, now that I'm here in Notre Dame, I can see how many of my what seem to be endless circles of what is going on are now applying to my life.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know that fact because I remember working on that way back when, and now it has relevance. So again, everything is connected.
Yes.
And you really have to be open to questions and not having a biased answer of what you think is going on. I think that is what kind of feeds the answer to, well, how can we possibly know what a dung beetle feels or how a dung beetle sees? Well, part of it is to sit down and go, okay, I'm a human. I'm very biased in my answer right now.
Of course.
What is important to me as a dung beetle? Well, getting out of the heat.
Yeah.
That means I've got to detect the heat somehow or detect the coolness. How am I doing that?
Yeah.
Or getting away from competition because you're going to steal my dung ball. Back off. Or developing how strong, you need to be as a dung beetle. A dung beetle, by the way, won the Guinness Book of World Records for the strongest creature in the world. Did you know that? The biggest one can lift 1,180 times its own weight.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing. I thought like ants were pretty strong.
No,
but dung beetles they take the title.
They take the cake.
They got the gold medal.
They do. They
Wow.
do. They're crazy strong,
amazing.
but they need to be
Yeah.
able to fight each other off and do like those body slams on the insects that are trying to steal their resources.
Steal their poo.
Yeah, it's still their poo.
Or
So
somebody else's poo.
Yeah.
it really depends on how creative we can get, and those are the questions that are worth pursuing. And you don't know what they're going to release. Like, okay, so we've got a dung beetle that can navigate by the Milky Way. that's going to be incredible for human navigation to figure out how that
Mm-hmm.
is done. Is it dyes in the eyes? Is it some sort of magnetic response? If we can mimic that, then that opens up a whole new way of navigating for us, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you don't know where these inroads are going to lead you to.
We do learn a lot from animals, and we've
Mm-hmm.
actually taken quite a bit of technology by mimicking what animals do. So
Yeah.
it's not far fetched at all.
No, and biomimicry is its whole
Of course.
Mm.
field,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is fascinating. If I was not a medical entomologist, I would have gone into biomimicry.
Yeah. So like things like aerodynamics, for
Yes.
example, from fish or birds
Mm-hmm.
moving through water or through air.
Yeah.
Navigating through the stars, that would be super cool to
Mm-hmm.
learn from a dung beetle,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to navigate through,
or like through
but
using
the
the
outer space scares me. So,
outer space. Okay, yeah,
but yeah, using the stars, sure.
using the stars.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I really admire your approach to science and your creativity in science. And hearing you talk about your journey from many different disciplines reminds me of my favorite scientist, Maud Minton, who started off doing biochemistry, ended up in the world of pathology and microbiology, and her just incessant curiosity about the world. And on top of that, she just did a bunch of other stuff. She was a painter. She took an Arctic expedition, I believe. She spoke all these languages. And so she was really more than just this researcher. She was a really creative person who took that into her research. I know that's something you do as well. And I want to hear more. We have a lot of things we can talk about with this. So you can kind of take it however you want. But what is your creative approach to research? And why do you think that's important? And should scientists be doing more of it? I know that's like a bunch of questions all at once, but
Okay, the easiest one. Should scientists be doing more of it? Yes.
okay, good.
Point blank, yes. And my creative approach, I think it's necessary to stay fresh and to try and absorb as much as you can from different people, different stories, different observations. So one of the techniques, if you want to call it a technique, that I use to kind of reset the program in my mind is to sit and observe. And whether that be usually outside and understanding, what am I smelling? What am I hearing? Forget about sight. Block sight out for a while because it's so dominant. But hearing and smelling and feeling, and you can pick up vibrations, and it changes the way your brain thinks. And for me, it frees it so that it's like, oh, okay, I really would like to listen to a podcast on X, Y, Z.
Right.
And let's see what I learn. And then going to conferences. Also open up your mind if it's not such a very specific conference. I go for a more generalist conference. But I find for me, a lot of the inspiration, I would say, and creativity comes, and brace yourself, guys, from my students and from kids that have unlimited expansions of unbiased thought that sometimes is over-enthusiastic and unrealistic. I agree. But for the most part, it's like, oh, there's that enthusiasm. There's these questions. There's the passion to drive through all the endless hours of trying to figure out if you're right or wrong.
Sure.
Or the determination to deal with failure, because science is failure. And that realization that the more you fail, it's not a bad thing. It's actually data, which is good. And you build resilience, and it's fantastic. You know, you can talk about everything. You can help everyone because you failed.
Yeah.
You know everything to possibly go wrong. Therefore, you're now an expert. So
Yes.
I love that everywhere can be inspiring and creative. And I really try to foster a sense of awe about, you know, whether the bread that I made turned out. You're like, wow, it worked.
Yeah.
I had way too many substitutions in that. But chemistry, always cook with chemistry.
Yes.
Chemistry.
Or you're walking and suddenly you notice this bug you've never seen before glittering in the sunlight. You're like, what is that? I don't know. My whole life here in South Bend is like that now because it's all different species. I don't have a clue what that is. What is it? Google Lens, where are you? So then I will read up, say, about a blister beetle. Well, what kind of chemical defenses do they have, and how would that apply to my tsetse flies? Or is there some sort of crosstalk there? And I've got inspiration from outside of what I'm doing, which makes me a better scientist.
And, I think a lot of scientists do try to interact with other scientists, but it seems like you're arguing interact even beyond science, interact with artists, interact with people in the humanities. All these different approaches can help shift how we approach research questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are some current creative research projects you're working on right now? If you want to talk about them or ideas you have.
Oh my goodness, I have so many ideas.
Excellent.
And you can reframe that question anyway.
Podcast isn't long enough.
We have time.
I like learning from people that are not linked with my field and seeing what kind of things we can come up with. So there is a professor here in sacred music that is a colleague of mine, and we got together to chat about how our worlds could collide in a positive way. And I'm really passionate about insects, as you already picked up.
Yes.
And I'm worried that we're losing them. That I think the estimate is 2% globally a year are just disappearing.
Oh, wow.
It's
2% of the species.
2% of the species,
wow.
yeah. And it's worse in some areas. I'll just say, for anybody who's used to driving, particularly in the Midwest, say like 30 years ago, your windshield would be covered with mucky bugs. And, do that now. There's no way.
Hardly any. Yeah.
Hardly any. So we're seeing it in our lifetimes. So this concern of mine was brought to a dialogue with this professor, Cynthia Castorelis, in sacred music. And we're like, you know what? Why don't we write a symphony?
Excellent.
She's a symphony conductor. Yeah. She has access to composers. We have access to media artists, videographers and visual artists.
And video editors.
And editors. Yeah. And so it's like, well, how about we tell the story from the insect's perspective, because I like thinking like an insect.
Wonderful.
And feature 6 insects, because insects have 6 legs.
Yes.
Of cultural and sacred significance that we are all familiar with globally. So they have to be present on 6 of the 7 continents. Right. And that can tell the story. So everyone you talk about is, have you ever heard of cricket? Yes, everyone's heard of cricket.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know what a group of crickets is called?
No.
The collective noun for a group of crickets?
I do not know.
I don't.
It's called an orchestra.
An orchestra. Oh,
that seemed obvious. We should have guessed that.
You should have.
That's so cool.
So people know what a cricket sounds like.
Yeah.
They know what a cicada sounds like in North America. You probably don't know what a dung beetle sounds like, but they're everywhere.
They are everywhere.
There, you can imagine what a dung beetle sounds like. Dragonflies, everyone knows about dragonflies and the fluttering. Something unique to North America, the monarch butterflies.
They're beautiful.
And they make the sound of a waterfall when they're cascading and overwintering in Mexico. So things like this, where we wanted to take the story of the insect and their journey and the perils of their journey and convert it to music, and with a video component explaining what the music is saying. And talk about this beautiful, rich tapestry of life and sounds. And then we were going to bring in the sounds of Chicago. And so it'd be both of us, kind of coexisting. But then, like things normally are, the human noise becomes more, the insects disappear. And then it was going to be blackout and silence. Until one lone cricket or violinist would come into the play and say, no, there is hope. We're decimating things at a very rapid pace, but there is hope that we can turn things around, because nature is resilient and we are smart. Like, those 2 combinations are a good thing. So that's one of the big projects that we want to develop further, and have a whole symphony playing this story and talking about insects disappearing.
I think that's so cool. And, I asked the question from the perspective of, how does that inform your research? But how, why does an approach like this work for communicating science to the public? What benefit is doing a more artistic, piece like this that isn't just here's what crickets do X, Y, and Z? Why do you think this works better? And if so, why?
I think the key is to foster empathy, and you only protect what you love.
Mm-hmm.
So until you have an emotional response to a problem, you are not going to step up to be a solution. And when you use art as a media, you evoke feelings and hopefully empathy, instead of the common narrative, at least with bugs. People are scared of bugs.
Yeah.
And like I was with cicadas. And they don't have the time or the willingness to dive into what it is that makes them interesting. And so if you have a media that can bridge that gap, like music, you can bring people in, especially music, because it's not visual necessarily. You feel music.
Right.
You can change the way people think about things in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, art as an expression of science is mandatory. And we are not living to our potential as scientists to engage with a community that can help us speak in words that we're not used to saying and aren't necessarily as effective either on our part, as opposed to a painting or a sculpture or an installation or a performance. So that's why it's a voice and a language that is missing.
So what can we do more? I mean, obviously you're doing amazing things to get the message out about something that you care about, that everyone really should care about.
Yes.
But you're also pointing out something that's very important, is that it's not just, people who are not scientists just don't care, or they're not interested, or not smart enough to hear us. There's kind of a burden on us as well as scientists to do a little bit more. So what can all of us do as scientists?
We need to get out there and talk. Sit someone down with me. I'm actually an introvert, which is why I love this recording studio, because nobody can see me. Well, you guys can see me, but it's like nice and quiet and intimate, and we could just chat. But, talk about what you do and let your enthusiasm and passion and knowledge speak for you.
All right.
And that will naturally garner questions. And the minute you get questions, it means that you've got engagement.
Right.
And you're doing knowledge transfer. And that's what's important. Yeah. And you're also, from your perspective, which could be a little bit selfish, finding out what matters to the person you're talking to, because that's more important than my own research portfolio. I want to help you live a better life. I want to help your animals be healthier. I want to make you feel more joy and awe and inspiration and all these things. So you have to tell me what is important to you. I can't guess. I mean, especially because I'm a foreigner. So I think that two-way conversation is so crucial, but it means that you've got to put yourself in there. Like when you're in the taxi, talk to your taxi driver. Yes. When you're in the grocery store lineup, talk to the person who's explaining to you where the navel oranges come from. And you're like, actually, do you know what? That dye that's on that, or the crab sticks. You're like, oh, those are made with insect proteins, carmine, that red right there. And then, of course, they're terrified and will never eat the crab sticks again. So you have to moderate your enthusiasm. But I think most of it is just get off of your pedestal in a way, even if it's not your own pedestal. People put you on there. Crawl down, get in the mud, and just have fun.
Just have fun.
Have fun.
And I think sometimes if you've been working in science for a long time, we say this a lot on this show. We already said it today. Science just a lot of times just doesn't work in the lab. We do all these experiments and it's just full of failure.
All the time.
And it's and that can take some of the enthusiasm away. And
it takes all of the enthusiasm.
Okay, you said it. The
it drains you.
It drains you. It drains you, and sometimes, but sometimes it makes it very difficult for us to go back and find that place of joy where we started. That first kind of glimmer when we first learned, whatever it is that we decided to waste, or I mean spend our entire life working. Sorry, Freudian slip there. But that how do we go back and find that in a consistent way, especially when we're talking to people outside of academia, outside of our labs, when it might seem like it's kind of commonplace for us, or something that we just do every day, something that's boring.
Yeah.
How do we actually bring back that joy, or kind of keep the flame in a sense?
It takes effort.
It takes effort.
It takes effort, especially after a long day of nothing working, or deadlines and teaching and troubles. You have to make it a point to plan to do something at least that week. You can't do it every day, but at least the week, to reground yourself.
Yeah.
Reground? Ground.
Ground.
Ground yourself.
Reground. Yeah.
Because if you don't, then there's nothing tethering you to that original feeling of why am I here in the first place?
Yeah.
And whether that be a conversation with a friend that isn't in such a stressful spot as you, or going outside and just being quiet, or engaging with community members so that you get out of your own head and you see what their concerns are, and maybe you'll have a solution, who knows. But it's distance. I think taking distance is so crucial for positive mental health and for keeping your sanity. Or no, not your sanity, but keeping your enthusiasm for what you're doing.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it can feel like a grind a lot of times, that the publisher perish. So it's like the pressure to produce things takes not only the joy, but the curiosity, because there's not space to take risks to fail.
Yeah.
So you can't try something wacky that might not work, but if it does work, be super cool. You have to really follow these pretty prescribed things a lot of times in research, I feel like. And it can be frustrating. It can be hard to convince the people around you that, no, I just need to go sit outside for, the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And not produce anything, not be productive, but just intake something. It's really difficult to input things that spark joy and creativity when you're in the slog of it, I feel like.
Absolutely.
And it's encouraging to have a scientist like you, especially here at Notre Dame, modeling that for a lot of people. It's not something that I've experienced or seen very often, to really know I'm going to do this because I know it's going to make me a better scientist. And you have the evidence to show that you've
Absolutely
done some really not only good research, but really effective community engagement as well. And it's part of the goal of this podcast is to get people to see that this is a way we should be doing scientists, that solves a lot of our current problems with science communication and burnout within research. So I could hear you talk about this stuff all day, because it's so just reassuring, first of all, and exciting. It's like, oh yeah, it can be fun, it can be joyous, it can be creative.
Yeah.
And
it can be learning. I mean, you said another way to, how do you respark that initial joy? And I'm saying distance, like forget about what you're worried about at that point. But ask people, why is it that you're doing what you're doing? Tell me what is inspiring you.
Yeah, to do what you do.
To do what you do. And you'll quite often find that the similarities between a scientist and an artist are identical. It's observation, it's discovery, it's experimentation. You don't know what's going to happen, and that's exciting and terrifying.
Yeah.
But it's this wow discovery, and every job is like that. There is an element of something that person gets from it that's positive. And if it's not there, then they need to change their job. There has to be at least something tiny there that is a reason for pulling your heartstrings, I want to say.
Yeah.
So you talked about that connection between artists and scientists, or the similarity between the two. So tell us more about how you see that. Is there really a division between what a scientist is and what an artist is? We do have job titles, and we have certain qualifications for each one. But, from a human perspective, do you see a big difference, or do you see similarities, and what do they look like?
I see more similarities than differences, but I have a disclaimer here in that I was raised by artists and I surround myself with artists, whether it's in spoken word, written, painting, sculpture, performing arts. I love it, and I foster it in my relationships. So that's my caveat.
Yes. A little bias there because all your
big
friends are.
bias. A big bias. You say, who's your favorite artist? I'm going to say Barry Rafus, my dad.
Good call.
But I would say that watching him create, because I had that opportunity to do so, is so filled with potential and excitement that is exactly mimicked in the lab when you pick a good experiment, or you're just dying to find the results. You know, you come in on the weekend to figure out, did it happen? And then how do I communicate that result to somebody who doesn't understand, say, microscopy?
Yeah.
And it's all about images and setting the stage and what media are you going to use, and all of this is what an artist is working with as well. How do I disseminate my work? How am I recognized for my work? What message do I want to say? It's identical.
It is very similar.
Yeah.
And one of those, I would say, this more powerful connection between the two is something that you do, that you mentioned, which is microscopy, because a lot of the insects they're using, or their different parts, their organs, they're very small. We really can't pick them out with the naked eye. So you do a lot of microscopy, and you have to color the different organs and the different parts in different ways.
Yeah.
So and some of these images look amazing. And so
a lot of them look
a
amazing.
lot of them.
A lot of them, but they're also conversation starters.
Yes.
So if you have like for instance in the airport, there's an image that you don't know what it is, but it's pulling your attention. Wow. You know, it's like, that's the kidneys of my tsetse fly, but hey, you know, I'm still getting your attention, and maybe we can talk about this. Why do I have that picture on the wall, and what does it mean, and why did I choose those colors? And, you know, I find that it inspires further dialogue, and that's what we want.
So you think, I'm being a little sarcastic here, you don't think it would be better to just put a plot with graphs and points on there to get the point at the airport?
If you do, I will be the first one to perform my brilliant graffiti talent.
I love it.
So funny.
I will have to modify your image. Yes.
I think that would be fair, Shahir.
I think
I
that
would
would
join
be-
her.
I think I'm kind of asking for it, don't you think? Yeah.
You should have asked me first, and I would have said that's a bad idea.
Wow.
But Shahir is also a very talented and brilliant artist as well. So another model of scientists exploring their artistic endeavors and allowing that to the flow between research and art is much more fluid, and I think it makes both things quite a bit better. So I'm trying to get better at art myself. You both have inspired me. I just signed up for oil painting classes because it's something I've been wanting to learn to do. So I've been trying to find that ways to create art and intake art that without trying to do anything other than just experience it in some way.
Maggie, you're making it sound like you're not a scientist artist yourself. I mean, you're...
I don't know. I want to get better. I think it's something that as a scientist, I aspire to do that more and intentionally seek out those opportunities to expand my artistic expressions, even if they're not, without the goal of them being excellent and should be in a museum, but just practicing creative practice, I think can be sufficient without having to generate something that needs to be shown to people. It's more internal for me at this point in my research and science career, I think. So do you do anything like that where it's just like, I'm going to sit down and draw just for me? Or is your creative practice really focused on creating things for the community in some ways?
I do both.
Okay.
I do both, yeah. Usually there's a goal in mind that I need to achieve, whether it be a beautiful slide that's easy to understand.
That is an artistic practice.
What colors, thinking about my audience and how many people are colorblind in the audience, and making sure that I don't have images that lose their punch just because I chose the wrong colors.
Right.
That kind of awareness. But I also like to create just to I want to say the word defrag, because it's
that
a
makes
way
sense.
to put my concentration on something else.
Right.
And then that distance, that provides distance to things.
To step aside a little bit.
Yeah. So sometimes it's listening to music. Sometimes it's listening to the way someone speaks, because you can paint pictures with words, and the words you choose are very important, particularly if you're working in different languages or different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So how you want to get a point across to, I don't know, my colleagues in Kenya might be very different than my colleagues in Canada, based on even color choices that I would use to depict something, or words. So I think beyond those kind of levels, and also trying to capture, instead of spoken and visual, smell, sound.
Ooh.
You know, how do you think in a different realm? Because we are so visually centric. It's really hard because we say things like, see you later.
Yes.
How does that look?
Yeah.
You know, and if you work with anybody who works that has any visual impairments, the way that you communicate is very different.
Yes.
And it takes training, and it's amazing. I mean, you realize that you certainly have your own inhibitions that this other person doesn't. I mean, they're like a superhuman person because they've tapped into so much more, and you're just like not there. So I find that trying to collate all of these thoughts and channel them into something that's creative, even though I may not realize I'm purposefully doing it, I'm just doing it naturally now because I've practiced it so long that it helps immensely trying to keep things in perspective.
So you actually mentioned, I mean, you mentioned that, you know, if you work with someone who's visually impaired, you have to, even your word choices have to be different.
Yeah.
So you actually have worked with visually impaired.
I have. When I was in Liverpool, I worked with a group called Bradbury Fields. And if anybody is from Bradbury Fields, hello! I'm the Canadian. And we would go hiking.
Yeah.
And I would become kind of like a guide dog for the day. So the guide dogs would go off leash, and I would be the guide that would allow us to go hiking. And we'd have a great day going and exploring the countryside. But if you're hiking, you are going to describe everything as, oh, look at in the field over there.
In the field. Oh, yeah.
Or, oh, there's a beautiful sunset, or, you know, all of these things. And I remember once I was walking with a remarkable human being, and I was frustrated because I was having a very difficult time describing, it was autumn, the colors of the leaves. Tell me how you do that.
Yeah.
And colors. And I was like, oh, but this one's brown. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't even know how to describe brown. She's like, well, it's crunchy.
Yeah.
Like potato chips.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness, this is 3-dimensional,
very
4-dimensional thinking.
It's a very different connection.
Oh, and I was like, Mary, you are so brilliant. And so that made me think, okay, so now start thinking in sound, describing
texture,
sound, describing texture. So when we're walking now, I'm going to take your hands and you're going to put them on something instead of just, you know, meandering the trail, or smell that. Can you smell that? Do you know what that is? I know what that is.
Yeah.
I can see what that is, but I want you to tell me what it is. And normally they would smell it well before me and tell me what it was. So I was like, oh, I'm just useless. But it is eye-opening, you know, and that is somebody who is visually impaired. Well, what if you had someone who was hearing impaired or had an anosmia? I ended up with long COVID for 2.5 years. I couldn't taste or smell.
Wow.
And your world rapidly changes.
Yes.
You realize how much of your life revolves around eating and drinking and smelling and, oh my goodness.
Yeah, we love food on this podcast.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, we love food.
Well, I love texture now.
Yeah.
So I've learned to appreciate texture beyond what I ever thought was possible. But it's just, we rely too much on predominant senses.
Yeah.
And that's very human-centric. And if you want to think like an insect,
Think like a dung beetle.
Might not be vision.
Yes.
It could be sense of smell. It could be magnetic pull like bees.
Yeah.
It could be vibrations like ants. It could be, you know, it's like, oh, get out of our own minds, appreciate other humans that have other skills not that we have. And that experience with Bradbury Fields was remarkable and phenomenal people to be working with as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just highlights not only the accessibility issue of how do we communicate our research to anybody, but then how do we change the way we think about how we're experiencing any type of data input, whether it's on a walk or in your own lab. Like, I think it's not something I ever thought about till you and I had a conversation about this a little bit ago, and I wanted to hear you talk about it more because I think it's important on both fronts. People need to have access, we say, but that can look a lot of different ways, and we don't really explore those very often. So I really appreciate you highlighting that and bringing that to the forefront for a variety of reasons. And it's really helped me ever since we talked about it a few weeks ago. Just changed how I interact with the world around me in a way, and it's been fun to do that. So yeah, thank you for bringing that to my attention. So now our listeners, hopefully. So
I have to give the credit to Mary for opening my eyes.
Yeah. So I have a couple rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Is this a game we're playing, Maggie?
I only have a couple.
Okay.
So, and they don't have to. If you want to expand your answer, that's okay.
You got this one.
Okay.
All right.
If you could be any bug, what would you be?
Not a tsetse fly. I think I'd like to be the last stage of the monarch butterfly that makes the migration to Mexico.
That is an excellent answer. I love it.
That's a winner.
That's a winner.
That's
yeah.
a winner.
I mean, I was like, maybe she'll say something really weird and freaky, but no, beautiful monarch butterfly.
Yeah, because I like flying and I love the whole concept of seeing the world from a bird's eye view. And because then you really see how things are connected.
Yeah, sure.
And you have a remarkable set of wings, way more than the 4 generations before you. So you got this massive wings that you can use to glide. And you end up all having, a nice cozy reunion in a tree.
How long do monarch butterflies live once they get down there?
I think they just overwinter and then they start the cycle all over again.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's longer than some bugs get to live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like mosquitoes. Yeah. Mosquitoes can live up to a month, about 2 weeks. I mean, they usually get eaten by something.
Yeah. I caught a caterpillar on my parsley plant this summer, and it cocooned and came out, and I was like, I'm letting you go, but you'll probably be dead very, very soon. But hopefully you do what you're supposed to do.
It's a circle of life.
You're sending protein back to nature. Right?
Well, recycling.
I have another question about flying. Do you ever have dreams where you're flying an insect?
I do.
Yeah, those are the best, aren't they?
I do.
Yes.
It's not usually like an insect. It's usually like something else. And you're running an owl, which is silent flight.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're just kind of swooping, which I love owls. So maybe that's why I'm channeling myself into an owl. But as for an insect, I have a little bit of misophonia. So anything that's like, I think I would lose my mind.
Yeah, so that's really why you don't like the cicadas.
I'd have to be a silent insect. So maybe a moth. Moths are silent.
Moths are silent.
Yeah. And they can be really beautiful. I saw something online about how build a moth bucket to attract moths and trap them, and you can kind of categorize them and get an idea of what's in your.
Yeah, it's fun.
And I haven't done it yet because I'm confused about what light I need, so I don't know. But I love moths. I think they're really pretty. So
cool.
Okay, rapid fire question number 2.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about living in South Bend so far?
I think the trees right now, I am so blown away. It's like sunshine dripping off of them. Yes. It's amazing. And coming from a grayer country like England, it's a stark contrast.
Sure.
So blue sky is also fairly phenomenal. So that combination weather-wise is, I feel like I'm waking up in a calendar every morning.
Yeah.
And I feel really privileged to be here.
The sunny fall days here are just gorgeous.
They are. Yeah. And for people-wise, I haven't met a lot of local people. That's going to change when I get a car and I get moving around, because right now my circumference is not very large around Notre Dame. But I am enthralled by the level of friendliness. It is over the top. And I'm basing this solely on all of my taxi drivers right now because they're my portal to South Bend. But phenomenal way with people, and warm and welcoming and excellent questions. And yeah, it's noticeable.
Yeah, this is a great community, and I hope you get to meet more local people. It is never a dull moment, and everyone is super friendly here. Like, it's a nice mix of a little bit of that southern friendliness, you know, but genuine friendliness, I feel like, as opposed to some of that southern stuff can get a little, oh, bless her heart type of vibe. So,
but I also love the diversity.
Yeah.
So I have met people from Ecuador, Venezuela, Mexico, Cuba. Yeah, all here.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
It is
quite
a very
a
special
little metropolitan area.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Fabulous.
All right. Speaking of living in England, Shahir and I both want to know, and maybe you don't have an answer. Do you have a favorite Premier League soccer team or football team? Sorry.
I have to say LFC, right?
Yeah.
Red Liverpool. I used to be a football player, so I try not to have an allegiance towards teams. I am in love with players and players' skills. And when they get traded, I follow them. I follow them.
Yeah.
So my gut reaction is like, I'm not going to get all upset over a loss, but I will get upset over a player getting hurt.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So in that sense, I'm a little bit different because it's not in my blood to be blue or red if you're in Liverpool.
Yes.
But I love the fans' enthusiasm and the support and just how much joy it brings, or sadness when they lose.
Yes. And the rivalry.
Yeah. It's a little bit like a religion, which is a bit creepy at times, depending on which country you're in.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's sports bring people together, and that's special.
So do you want to say one of your top 2 favorite players currently?
No.
Or?
No.
Oh, that's fair.
Very smart. Very smart.
Definitely not.
Well, Shahir is a Chelsea fan, but I give him
I like
of...
Liverpool as well.
Yeah, I know you like Liverpool.
I have
too.
to.
Yeah.
I
know
have
you
to
do.
like Liverpool.
Right. I know you do. But I just recently kind of really invested in the soccer world.
Okay.
So I didn't used to love. I thought sports were stupid, and now I'm like, oh, this is actually like.
But then you
a
discovered
fun-
like the sport.
Because my kid plays soccer and football, so we watch Premier League every weekend now, and I'm very invested. And I guess I won't say my team since nobody else is really disclosing. I'm proud of it, but
That can be another episode.
All right, that's all the rapid fire questions I have. Shahir, do you have any other final questions for Lee?
I'm just curious a little bit about what you're doing in the lab. I just want to go back to that real quickly and just
because this idea of insect husbandry, it sounds so
bizarre,
fancy.
Yes.
So
what is that, and what does a typical like insect husbandry day or week look like?
So I'm basically an insect farmer.
Yeah.
Which ties into my roots as being farmer girl. So currently we are creating an insectary that will be able to grow tsetse flies because we had the largest breeding colony in the UK. And once we get everything ready, we're going to try and do the same in the US. They're not going to escape. So for any of you that are worried about tsetse fly escapes, no, don't bring them here. But if they do escape, that they won't, but they'll die. They can't handle this weather.
They can't.
There's no way. No. But right now we are growing mosquitoes, and a general day in the lab is to take a big cage of hungry female mosquitoes and give them a blood meal. We don't feed them on ourselves. We try to avoid feeding them on ourselves. So we import sheep blood from a company and then put it into kind of like a little baggie that's heated up, and then they'll feed off of that and be very happy.
Kind of like a balloon.
It's kind of like a balloon,
and because they have to pierce through it.
They have to pierce
can't just
through it.
You can't just put the blood in a pool.
They will not drink it.
They have to pierce through
They
it.
do. They have to release it so their mouth parts are freed to drink like a straw.
Yeah.
So they will drink, and then the ones that take a nice big fat blood meal, that means that she's going to have eggs maturing fairly soon. So then we put out wet piece of paper, like a coffee filter, in a pot of water, and then she will come and lay her eggs. And we're all excited. Yes, we got the next generation to hatch out. And then they hatch, and you feed mosquito larvae, which if you ever wonder what they look like, look in your bird bath.
Yeah.
They're probably there.
Yeah.
They're very energetic.
They're squirmy.
They're very squirmy swimming things. And then they pupate. They turn into my version of the perfect lava lamp. So they don't feed. They look like little mini Shreks, and they just rotate. I'm giving a good picture.
Yeah, I love it.
Micro Shreks in a vessel. And then they will emerge 2 to 3 days later, and you start the whole cycle again. So one of the projects we're working on is this drug that seems to kill any blood-sucking creature that feeds on it. Wow. So we're looking at ways to get the drug in contact with the mosquito. So whether it's in the blood source or sprayed on a surface, and then they walk on the surface and then they die, like an insecticide. Or when they feed on sugar, because both the males and females feed on sugar. If you have the drug in the sugar, will it kill them off? So it's a way to control diseases and ones that are spread by mosquitoes in particular right now. So so then we do experiments with the drugs and the blood meal to see what dose you need to kill the mosquito, and does it affect the amount of babies that it produces. Yes, ad nauseum, very boring, but cool end product.
Right.
You
have to do the boring things to get the exciting things.
Yeah, but see, that's when you put on a good podcast.
Oh, that's right.
You put on a good podcast and you sit there and you absorb and you get into a routine, and then it's almost like, I don't know, meditation in a way. Yeah. But you're also training students that haven't got the routine yet, and so they're excited to learn about things that they never saw before. And I say things about body parts with microscopes, and when you look at a tsetse fly's feet, it's like like the Mark and Mindy. I think. It's kind of like that. So they have these weird feet with. They're orange with these combs, and they're actually furry, and they look cute. People say they look like cute toes on a fly. I'm like, seriously, but it's true. I know. So you take things for granted. You're like, yeah, it's a fly. Go away. I'm raising you. It's boring. Yeah. But then you see the world through someone else's eyes that are all new and fresh, and you're like, actually, that is kind of cute. I think, wow, this is unusual that I'm doing this as a job. I know it feels routine, but it's not routine to somebody who's never done it before. So it's what I think might be boring is actually not boring. So everybody needs to come and work with me.
That's perfect.
I know. Maybe I'll come visit you and check out all the fun stuff.
I'll put you to work.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I work with blood every day too, but I don't feed it to things. I a little bit differently, but I still telling people I work with blood. They're like, "What?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's just kind of what I do every day."
That's what you do.
If it's unusual.
Yeah. So, all right, Lee, is there any last thing you want to leave for our listeners about? What should they know about insects? What do you wish people would do with the insects in their house? One, or maybe you have nothing and you want to say, thank you, listeners. But is there anything you want to say?
I would say, listeners, don't be scared of insects. Take some time to understand them. Yeah. And if you want to lose that fear of them, write to me. I will help you lose your fear. Definitely. But no, it's important to realize that they are disappearing. Yeah. And I think that's the big thing, that we are having an impact on insects that is important and not something that we should be celebrating. Yeah, that's my parting thing. So be aware of what you're doing.
Be aware, and don't be afraid of insects.
Don't be afraid. No. Very few will bite you and hurt you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lee, for being here with us. This has been an absolute joy to have you here and get to talk to you about insects and art. So thank you so much.
Well, this was a great opportunity for me to wax on poetically about bugs.
You could have gone on for much longer, so we'll have to do it again sometime.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Thank you.
At the end of our show, we would like to thank you, our lovely listener, and our awesome audience for spending your time with us. We thank the Notre Dame College of Science and the Indiana University South Bend College of Arts and Sciences. Special thanks to the wonderful people at the Notre Dame Studios. Coming to you from beautiful South Bend, Indiana, in the heart of the Rust Belt, this is Rust Belt Science. I'm Shahir Rizk.
And I'm Maggie Fink.
And we'll catch you next time.